form, which is this right here. This is where we're collecting all the data, and you can see how it's a little different each time. So if we go into components, then add form, that's here. We're pulling in use state. We're also bringing in another special function called use effect. And what use effect, one of my issues was when I was clicking through, it wasn't properly re-rendering the new data. It didn't seem to re-render based on the count properly. So what I wanted to do was use effect, which will fire a function given any new change. So then it was able to re-render and bring in this new data. So I've got the use effect happening there. I've also got my styled and my connect. I've got choose one, which I'm pulling in from the UI, and so that's this little component right there. So that's helping me out with that section. Then we've got form input, which is what I call this, which I think is kind of a dumb name. I should probably call it text input. I've also got date input, which I'm pulling in. That's because over in the mortgage section, I want to pull in a date here. So that's just something that I've got. Then I've got my range bar. So each one has a range bar like so, and that's what I'm pulling in as well from the UI section. I've also got my mini range bar, my button light. So that's this button here, which is the same as, so it's the same type of button as these. It just has different text. Then I've got my add item action. So this is an action that if I go down into my net worth, so I've got my reducer, which is my state. When I create a new thing like credit card, whoops, I'm terrible at that. There we go. So I've created all this data. I want to now add it to the reducer. So I go add, boom. There is an action that's being fired that's adding this to the reducer. So this is the so the reducer's here, we've added it. Now I'll kind of discuss what's going on with it. So what I did is, let's see, the add item action. So add item action takes the item ID and the entire state that we've created. So it's going to take those two things. Its type is net worth reducer add item, and then its payload, so what's going to put in is this ID and then all of the state. So the state, I'll kind of have to walk through what's going on there, but basically it's this really simple little function. The reducer is listening for that function, so it sees add item. When it does that, it's going to go into the category. So it's going to go into state, then into whichever category we've wanted to put it in. So in this case, say we want to add an asset, so it's going to go into assets. So it's going to look at which category it is. Then it's going to create a new thing using the ID. So it's gone into assets. It'll create a new item with the new ID and then put all of the state into that. So that we'll have, say, 1, 2, 3 will be the new item, and then the state will be all of this stuff will be then put in here. So that's what's going on in Redux with the add item function there. And so if I go back into the add form, the most important thing about this form is the state that it's collecting. So if I go back over here, all of the data that it's holding while we're inputting these new values. So value, so as I'm putting it in, it's keeping it all local to this form. It hasn't put it directly into the reducer because we haven't created it yet. So in order to do that, at first what I was doing, and I think I showed this in my other videos, I basically had a state object here right along the top, but it started to get really big because I wanted to hold all sorts of different data for each item. So I wanted to know its interest rate, and I wanted to know this current value and its book value. And so suddenly it just became too much data that was kind of clogging up this whole thing. So I decided to move all of that data over into my data folder. So right up here, we already did our net worth wizard data. We looked at that. But then I created a new thing called individual item data. So this is the base data structure that all of this is being added to. So each item has the same structure. So it's a function that takes a category, a subcategory, book value, and these different items, which are going to be passed into it through add form. And then it's returning this big object. So if we see this huge object here, that has the category name, the label, the subcategory, the registration, so that's if it's tax-free savings or RRSP, the interest rate, the current value, the book value, and then each of these items. So I can't just have current value be 221 because I need to be able to have a range bar that changes the current value. And so because of that, I need the range bar value, the financial value, the name, the label. So it gets quite tedious. And if you guys have different ideas on how to structure this data, I'd be really interested to hear what you think, because it would be cool to be able to trim it down quite a bit. But still, I need the versatility to be able to keep it all. So I don't know what the best option is. So if we go back to add form, what I've done is I've pulled in the individual item data. So that's the data we were just looking at. It's being passed in, and let's just see. I've also got a selector for the property names. So if I go into here, I want to be able to do primary residence or Batman's cage or big house or all of these different things. So I want to be able to see what I've already added as properties. So I've got a selector that's going into the reducer, and if we maybe look at that selector, where is the names? I'll just search names. I probably should have done this before. Here we go, property name selector. So it's taking the entire reducer, it's going through, looking at all of the assets, and then filtering out all the property assets, and then mapping out the labels. So this is returning then an array of each label of a property asset. So if I had a property asset that was a house, the label is house. So now I have this array of like house, bat cage, so on. So this is being passed into the property name selector. Now, I don't think that you guys have to worry about this with the spending section, but it's just something to be aware of. Then we've got our individual item data. So when it starts, I'm pulling all of these items in, like the category, the subcategory. So these, if we recall, are being passed in through here, through the render add form. So I'm passing in the category, subcategory, the different labels and things. So now in add form, I'm receiving all of these, and then I'm just naming them using destructuring right in the function, the top of the function. So it's taking all of these different functions and everything here, the add item action, the property name selector, and then creating this function. So we start off with our initial state. The initial state, in this case, I call it individual item data. Then I'm passing in what I've already received. So I received category. So the individual item is now going to have, say if it was assets, then we're passing in assets. Then we're passing in cash assets. So this way, if we go back into here, this data, which I'm receiving, which is hard-coded in over here in the net worth wizard data. So I've got my assets, my cash assets, all of these things are passed into net worth. Then we're mapping through, we're passing it into add form. Add form is receiving it, then destructuring out the names. Then it's passing all of those details into the individual item data, which is kind of back over here. So essentially, all of this data is being passed one at a time to each new item. So if we have an item that happens to be in the category assets with the subcategory cash assets, it's all being filled out, pre-filled out. So that way, when we go in here to add an item, we know this is already going to be filled out for the section unsecured debt. So we know that this is in the section unsecured debt. Similarly here, we know that this is in property assets, so that when we add it, it's going to go into property assets. So that's the or where were we? So we've initialized our data. We've got our initial state, which is now an object that contains all of that data. Then we use our state and set state function to set the state as the initial state. Then I'm using the spread operator so that it creates a copy of it. I'm not really sure. I don't really know why we have to do that or the exact logic. I've just learned to do that and it works, and it doesn't work the other way. So maybe you know. I don't know. So we do that. So we've set our initial state is now this object that contains all of this information already pre-filled. Then we've got our use effect, which is just setting the initial state, and then I'm passing in category and subcategory. I'm just passing this into it, and somehow that's reinitializing the state so that it's changing on every change. I had to fumble around with a bunch of different ways to do that. I think it was right here that I got lost in the teaching of you guys, because I had to spend quite a bit of time figuring this out, and I didn't want to waste your time with more videos with me trying to figure it out. So we've got that. Then we've got a set value function. So this is a function that is written specific to this add form, and it is receiving log value, range bar value, and range bar props from the range bar, and then it's setting state. So then it's receiving all these details from the range bar, then it's using this function, which is set state, to set that into our initial state. So in doing so, if I go into here, then we're able to change the financial value or the range bar value for each of the different things. So we're using the range bar or that set value to set these values. Then we've got our set date, which we only use once, but that is setting the date right here. So we've got a date here. So that function is used to set the date here. Then if I go back into here, our add item function. I think I already kind of went through these a little bit, but so I had to do this. I forget why I had to have this function set add form category false. I had to do that. It had to do with when I would submit at the end. If I added something here, I had to be able to. Oh, I think it was because if I add, if I new item, then I go add, I wanted it to disappear. So I want it, so that's what this function does. So it sets the add form subcategory to false. So that way it disappears. That's something that I think we've got set add form subcategory. I just want to see where that's coming from. So, okay, so that's the function we talked about earlier, that here, when I added, I didn't want it to disappear if I click add, but here I do. So on the main page, it's null, but now in the add form, which is what's being rendered in this page, then it is making it disappear. So that's what's happening right here. Then it's creating a random ID. So I'm just using math.random times like a billion to create a random ID. And then we're using this ID to fire the add item action, which is setting the ID and the state. Then we reset the state to initial state. So we're resetting the state to kind of clear it all out. So then when we go add, the state disappears. So if I just write some stuff here, then it resets the form. So that's what's happening here. We've got our container. So this one's pretty big. Ooh, I wonder how I'm doing for time. I don't want to spend way too much time on this, but basically we've got the container is separated into 3 sections. We've got our left, our center, and our right. So I call the left here. We're using a little bit of stylization. So the container itself, here I have so we've got our width set, our border radius, all the details are set there. Then it is receiving, so container is receiving subcategory. So subcategory is being passed down to it. And then it is using that, if we go into container, I think it's the container, or it's passing it into the header to change. Oh, no. Okay, so it's changing the height according to the subcategory. So here, most of them are quite small because they don't have that much data, but the mortgage one needed a little bit more height, so that's why this is being sent to the subcategory, looking at it, checking it to see if it's secured debt, and increasing the height if it is. So that is what's going on there. In our left section, we've got our choose one, which we've pulled in, and then we're passing in the array for that. You guys will have hard-coded arrays because you're going to have choose one will be fixed expense or variable expense, and then also if it's a like a lifetime expense or if it's for a set duration. So your choose one will be different, and I think you're going to have two choose ones. So you'll have to play around a little bit with that. Then our center, we've got our form input. We've got the handle change. So this is setting the state, the label. So it's going into the initial state and changing the label of that state. So that's what's happening right here, of whatever the event is. So when I type here, this is the event, and it's setting that label into the state. Then, so that's there. We've got our form input. If it is secured debt, then we want a date input. So in this case, it's secured debt, so we've got a date input. So then I can add the date stuff for the mortgage, which you guys don't have to worry about. I don't think you'll have to do any date inputs on that one. So then here, we're checking to see if it's property, secured debt, or unsecured. And if it is, then we want the 2 range bars. So sometimes we want these 2 range bars, other times we just want the 1. So in this case, it's just 1. In this case, it's 2. So we're using our ternary operator to check what kind it is. I really like it when I can do subcategory is property assets or this or this. I love this or operator. So then that's what's going on here. So we either render 2 range bars or just the 1, because everyone gets 1. That's the center section. Then in the right, I've got a mini range bar wrapper. So that's the wrapper that is wrapping in here. And then it's doing the same thing, checking to see if it's secured or unsecured. So in your case, you're going to be checking to see if it's fixed or variable debt to render out which kind of mini range bar you'll be rendering, because sometimes you'll need the start year or how many years it's going to be. So that's something that you'll be using ternary operators similarly there. And then we've got our simple buttons, just our add and back. Now in this case, we aren't using the back button, but over here, if I go add item, this is where we want to use back. So that's a bit of an issue that I should probably look at. I probably shouldn't have the back button visible here, but for now I'm just going to leave it. And then here it's pulling in the entire net worth reducer. Now let's see if it's using the net worth reducer. I don't think it is. So what I'd been, at the time I was using this to console log out the net worth reducer, but I actually don't need that. So I don't need that state, so I'm just going to remove it. Whoops, it's taking me forever. Cool. And that is the add form. So that's kind of the biggest, most complex one. If you can make it through that, then, and you can kind of understand, having seen my coding before, if you saw that it takes a lot of the ternary operators, because there was so many different types that I wanted to incorporate, and it was my dream to have just this one component that does everything. And so this is it. So it was a bit complicated to build, but considering all it does, it's not too crazy. Cool. There we go.